Hey, welcome to our second part of the summer reading list with Instructor grind set. And as you can see here, I have two piles. And my reading got a little more diverse than in part one. I went a little bit crazy at the library and buying books. And it's diverse in topics, but also diverse in time. Some of these books are from the 30s. Others are from the 70s. So I had a lot of fun with that. And a lot of these books are referenced in a book I read in part one, which was Written in the Snows, which is a history of skiing in the Pacific Northwest. They had a bunch of books referenced in there they're actually not all here, from the Mountaineers Club around Mount Rainier, and one book called Wilderness Skiing from the Sierra Club, actually, so just around Lake Tahoe. And I'm not going to talk about these in order that I read them. There is no particular order, actually. It's all I just picked them up. I put the thickest one on the bottom. So yeah, let's get started. A lot of these books are actually super outdated. It's crazy to see just how far the sport and the different disciplines of the sport have come. And it's hard to get, as a young person, as a 25-year-old, it's hard to get a grasp of just how different the sport was back just 50 years ago. And I really am lucky that I had the chance to go into all that. So Wilderness Skiing was a book that was referenced in Written in the Snows, and the reason I got this book was because when I read about it in Written in the Snows, it sounded like this book explored Nordic and backcountry skiing as a spectrum, from flat and rolling hills on a groomed track all the way to steep downhill chutes where you need a heavier setup and stiff plastic boots. And although being super outdated, this book was a fun read, and it talks about the fundamentals of touring, and it talks about backcountry as a backcountry Nordic sport and backcountry touring, and it actually helps you decide which one is best for you based on your goals out in the backcountry, and also what to do if you can't decide. So this is good. Can I get it up like this? Can I stand it up? Nah. So Wilderness Skiing, Sierra Mountain Club, super outdated. The skis used to cost $75 back then. I continued to see skiing more as a spectrum, from lightweight, flat hills, maybe groomed tracks, to ungroomed, and it brought me to classic Nordic. This book was published some years ago this is the third edition, so 1972. There's a few editions that came before, but 1972, this book was neat. It shows pictures. It's a manual. It shows different variations of pulling and kicks. That looks like just the pull, push, basic pull, push. And I read this one at the same time as I read the new cross-country skiing by John Caldwell. And this one's interesting because John Caldwell really knows what he's talking about, and he has perspective of Nordic skiing back when an Olympian would maybe train 6 months a year and had a full-time job, and the sport was different, the whole world was different. So that paired with this, and this is also a manual. You'll have the pictures. There's also more writing in here. It goes more in depth than this one, and I don't recommend you buy these. I'm just letting you know I read them and that I had a good time reading them. I don't recommend you buy these unless you're interested in the history of the sport. If you're interested in just learning, get yourself the most recent books, because it'll actually tell you what to buy in and it'll consider prices of equipment and what poles to buy. It'll consider equipment that didn't exist back here. So definitely, if you're interested into diving into the evolution of cross-country skiing, definitely read these. So these were my super light Olympic style freestyle and classic history reads to get an idea of where the sport came from. So I guess if we were going to stack this from lightest to heaviest, like backcountry skiing as a spectrum, or skiing as a spectrum, then it would start like that. And I read, this book was actually one of my favorite reads of the summer, Cross Country Downhill. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically backcountry Nordic for beginners, and it's great. This is Steve Barnett, a legend of the West Coast. He was an avid telemarker. Let's see if we can get a couple pictures. So he was the first to heavily document doing hills 30 to 40 degrees on cross-country skis. Yeah, he had a little bit heavier setup. This is definitely backcountry Nordic, but back then it was still lighter than telemark. So telemark's a little heavier on the scale. I actually didn't read any telemark books, but this would sit like that, and it's also outdated. The skis cost. Well, let me just tell you when it was published. Beautiful picture on the opening cover, by the way. Wow, that really sells the idea for me. So this book has a lot of high traverse ideas, not where to go, but where to find them, and also multi-day trips. That's multi-day trips are more of a, I mean, if you're going unassisted, if unassisted is your gig, then multi-day trips are going to most likely happen on telemark or light telemark setups or backcountry Nordic setups with leather boots. And that's quite nice. Can't see when it was published, but it was in the 70s. So more stuff from the 70s. That's all fun. So steep cross-country skiing is a thing, and some people don't want to go any heavier, and there are techniques for that. So like telemark turns on a backcountry Nordic setup, things that might be a little bit more common now, relatively, like in total skiers doing it, but definitely something that's gotten a lot more rare if you look at all the backcountry disciplines. The industry wants to sell the most accessible gear, and the accessible gear is the gear that might be a little heavier, but also helps you stand up and gets you moving down the hill for a lower minimum skill. So this book is not about that. It's about how do you get your super light Nordic setup that's still just heavy enough and stiff enough and stable enough to go do a little bit steeper downhill, and how do you adjust your technique and your day trip to get that done. So great stuff in there. The oldest book I got is Otto Lang's Downhill Skiing. This book was hard to find. I found one on eBay, and it cost me a little bit of pocket money, but that's all right. And the interesting about this, the thing I realized when reading this, was that the Arlberg technique has not changed very much since we introduced all of our new equipment. It's kind of crazy that we still basically in ski school learn with exactly the same progression. Snowplow turn, then into the Christie. The cool thing with this book is you get the language that they used back then. So you get all the sexy words like parallel Christiana and Schuss. So this book, if you want to understand why we teach skiing the way that we teach it nowadays, this is a great book. I'm actually going to put this in a different pile here. This will be the, can you see that? Oh. Okay, so we have our, yeah, that's all right. You can see the top. So we have our downhill. So backcountry Nordic, downhill here. This book is interesting if you want to really see why we learned to ski the way that we did, and and why it's still relevant. It's still relevant. I think that we're teaching skiing the right way. After reading this book, I see why we do it that way, and I see that Otto Lang did a really good job writing this book. He didn't invent the Arlberg technique. It was taught to him by Schneider. He was a pupil of Schneider and moved to the Northwest. That's how he ended up being referenced in Written in the Snows. If you live in the Pacific Northwest, go find this book. It's at the Sammamish Library. You might be able to get it transferred to another library, and it's not too expensive. For what it is, it's really not expensive. It's so valuable, so much valuable knowledge in there. So Written in the Snows, if you get the chance, definitely get that. And you'll get a bit of a summary of a lot of these books in there as well. Soft Skiing is a book I read pretty much every year since I got it a few years ago. This is soft skiing for the elderly, but it applies to everyone. It's the idea that skiing is not just for the extreme skier or the racer. So this book actually is getting more and more relevant as the years go by, and as people are looking for immediate feedback and moments that they can share on their first day. And if they want to feel, if you get a client who wants to feel like a skier from day one, as is the case more and more often, and who has a trial mentality, then this book has a lot of bits that you can steal for those lessons, whether it's an old skier or not, whether it's a wise skier or not. So I recommend reading this book frequently, actually, because that's what works for me. And I hope it works for you too. That's in the downhill. And it's pretty traditional. It's just a take on... It's pretty traditional. It's nothing crazy. I have some crazier books in here. It's nothing crazy. It's just how do you let the skis do more of the work, and how do you adapt your terrain choices and your technique to make it more effortless if efficiency is the goal, if absolute efficiency is the goal and not performance. So alternative to performance right here. It's called Soft Skiing, The Secrets of Effortless Low Impact Skiing. It says for older skiers, but really it's for everyone. To change the subject on, yeah? Take a break from skiing for a second. I read Unplugged, and this book is exactly what it sounds. We are constantly connected to smartwatches, sleep measuring devices, treadmills that tell us our heart rate, stride length, everything like that. And this book tells us that basically these things are not that accurate and not that helpful, and that you should listen to your body. That's pretty much the gist of this one, and it gives you the details. It also tells you more interesting things like whether measuring your VO2 max is worth the money for you or not. And it's just a fun read. You see how you really get to notice how maybe you're overly connected to the point that you're unable to listen to your body to the best of your ability when you read this book. So I got it at the library, and back here it says it costs $35 US. So I think the more connected you are, the more value you get out of this book. I'm not too connected. I wear a watch sometimes when I work out, and I still got something out of this book. I definitely wouldn't have paid a full $35 for it. I definitely got this book because I had it at the library. And here's the back if you want to pause, and hopefully it focuses in. So that's Unplugged for you. Get off your phone, start listening to your body. Your watch is maybe not that accurate. And also in that kind of health and wellness, I got Miracle of Flexibility. I wanted to get a head start on a building blocks of functional movement webinar series that I signed up for with PSIA. So I read this book, and that's pretty good. This has a ton of stuff, and it's all isometric. So it has isometric with stretching. Here is a sample page. It'll show you little silhouettes. So it's a full program. It'll tell you what to do, when to do it, how much to do it, and why. And in the beginning, the first chapter actually explains your body as a system, and that's a fun read. So if you get this book, this is also a $35 book if you buy it for the price marked on the barcode. And I recommend this book. I think the older or wiser you are, the more relevant this becomes. But starting early is always the best way to stay in shape. So no matter how old you are, this book's good. $35 starts to add up. Like, if I had paid full price for these instead of going to the library, it would have been $70. I could watch a couple of YouTube videos that give me the general gist of these, but these go in high detail, and I borrowed them for free, so that ended up working out. Also at the library, this is pretty much the last non-skiing book. There's one in there, but I haven't read it yet. There's this one. So there's a couple more non-skiing books. This is Adaptive Leadership. This book talks about leadership in a changing organization, in a changing world, and it's interesting because there's the whole first half of the book is about diagnosis, the all too missed, all too little rewarded diagnosis. And actually, since reading this book, I've started a diagnosis of a modern ski technique and its relevance to the new skiing customer and the new skiing equipment. And it's helped me guide a few of my ideas, and so fun to read a book that's meant really for business, and when you apply it to the skiing industry, you get just as much out of it. So I got this at the library as well. It teaches you how to break down diagnosing the structure, culture, and defaults of a company or organization. So really interesting, and basically breaks down the idea that nowadays all we want to do is have a new idea and execute and get rewarded for it and get known for it, and bing bang boom. And if the idea isn't exactly what the organization needed, well, at least you got your credit, and that's good enough. And this book slows you down, stops you right in your tracks, and tells you, well, what if there was a maybe not so quick but at least approachable way to get the information you need all in one place that will help you, that you can refer to for years to come, to then back your ideas with. And condensing your diagnosis in your pitch when you're talking to someone who needs to hear your idea really drives the point home. And that's important at PSIA because there's already a way that we like to do things, and if you want to stray from that, you better go in with a bit of a defense, a bit of a spine. So this book gets you your spine going. Figuratively, if you want literal spine education, then that's this book, Miracle of Flexibility, at the library. So these were my library picks for this month, or the last 2 months. And there's 2 books I mentioned in part 1 of the summer reading list. I mentioned The Story of the Human Body and Exercise. I had started reading this one, but I felt like it just wasn't quite right. It didn't fit with what else I was reading, and it was just not the right timing. And this book I read recently I just finished it, exercised, and this is much more relevant to skiing than the story of the human body. It talks about sleep, rest, endurance, strength, and why we are the way we are. It looks at hunter-gatherer tribes in modern day, Neolithic hunter-gatherer tribes, and the Western world, compares them, contrasts them, and actually shows us that the way we are is evolutionarily correct. Our sedentary lifestyle is evolutionarily correct, and that it's not that bad, and that actually stressing over whether or not you're being consistent with the way you were created is healthy or not. So interesting read, and it also connects to skiing quite well. And if you're stressing and you feel bad that you're not exactly being the human you were built to be, this book will actually end up being a little reassuring, and it shows you why. It shows you the science why that is the case. So, Exercised by, what's his name? Daniel Lieberman. Great book. So this one's pretty interesting. It's got a bunch of stuff. If you want the little more academic read, definitely get this one. If I were this guy's student, I definitely would want to find a summary for this book personally. But I think I'll come around to it. I think I'll read it eventually because it's interesting. It's evolution. It's cool. So that's that for Daniel Lieberman. And back to skiing. I started diving into alternative skiing teaching methodologies, alternative teaching styles, alternative curriculums, whatever you want to call it. And I fell on instant skiing, GLM. I kept this one in the Ziploc because I don't think it's ever been opened before, and it's from the 70s. So this is actually the book written by the guy who invented the method, Cliff Taylor, and this guy was way ahead of his time. He was putting people on short Spademan skis, and if you don't know what the graduated length method is, basically you start on short skis that are not very much longer than your boot, and ideally the skis have zero tail, so your heel is all the way up against the back of the ski. So you cannot lean back whatsoever, and you go straight to parallel. They teach you parallel from day one. They teach you to twist, and the idea was way ahead of its time. It was to get people to feel like they're skiers from day one, and I won't say too much about that, but that's what that is. I'm not going to start any fires here on YouTube until I really feel I know what I'm talking about. It'll probably, if I do start a fire about this, it'll go straight to my blog, and then we'll see if I make videos about it. So check out my blog. It's also called Instructor Grindset. The full link is pretty easy to remember. instructorgrindset.blogspot.com or org. But basically it's instructorgrindset.blogspot. The link is in the bio of most of my YouTube videos. I need to put it in the bio of the channel. That would help. And if you, I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn, even if you don't know me. I'll add you back, and I post my articles there. That's where I want those little blog posts to be read. That's where my audience is, I think, for that specific website. The second book is also on GLM that I got, and it's kind of the same thing. These two have a different audience. So one of them is trying to sell you the classes a little bit and tells you how it works, and the other one goes in depth. This is the book, if you don't want to take the class, then this is the book that goes more in depth. It's got bigger pages, and this is the kind of book that you would, back in the 70s, bring to the mountain. And if you had access to your own set of Spademan GLM skis, then you would get on these. And that's pretty interesting. And I looked up the history of Spademan Bindings, the company, and it's, I mean, it also seems like that was ahead of its time. It seems like if they were to come back there would be a chance, just like the GLM method. So that's all I'll say about that. And the last two books, Powder Days. Let's start with Powder Days. This is a Heather Hansman book. Heather Hansman traveled to a few different ski towns and wrote the stories of the people there, tried to find some local legends. My favorite chapter in here is called Skid Luxury, and I really recommend this book. I don't have the dust cover anymore. The dust cover I could have shown you the back. And this is just a fun read. It's a fun read. And if my brain is fried and I don't want to read something I'll necessarily want to remember in high detail, then I can read this and know that I'm getting some entertainment. And if my brain isn't fried and I still need a break and I read this, then I feel like I'm getting some value. So great book. It's called Powder Days, and it's a light read. It's approachable. It's fun, and who knows, if you're a local legend, maybe you're in this book. Lastly, I got Snow Structure and Ski Fields. This book was also mentioned in Written in the Snows, and it's an older book on snow structure and ski fields. So basically, avalanches, snow, crystals. The reason I got this book was because it showed the process of early photography and measurement of snow structure, and also because it summarized the history of the study of snow structure. So this guy, man, what is his name? Sigmund. This is one of my older books. I can give you a date. It says 1962. The original book was published in 1936, and this is the 1962 edition, but it really sounds like it was written in 1936. Everything that is mentioned in this book is pre-1936. It goes back to snow science in the 1800s, which is really quite wild, and it relates it all to skiing in the backcountry and avalanche dangers. So if you're looking for a book that summarizes and explains early snow science as it relates to skiing in the backcountry back in the day, read this book. And if you're looking for a book that teaches you how to go backcountry skiing this weekend, then get yourself a more modern books. If you're just reading this, you won't be able to tell what's outdated and what's not. And it's important to know the most current knowledge when you're going out in the backcountry, so you're not basing your decisions off of some conspiracies that made their way to final products of studies back in the day. So there you go, snow structures and ski fields, if you want to learn about the history of the process of measuring snow. I'll put that one in here. This is the general education stuff. So Powder Days, we talked about that. That concludes the summer reading list. That's all of them. That's all I read this summer. This part one and this. I got a few more I'm going to read. I don't know if I'll make a video on them because they're all just kind of fun. Well, yeah, I should make a video on them. And I'm going to include some rereads, probably from prior years. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think I read a little bit this summer. If you're not currently an avid reader, go see part one, because I wasn't at the beginning of this summer. At the beginning of the summer, I really wasn't reading much. I wasn't reading at all. It was actually a foot injury that forced me to sit on the couch and start reading. So if you're not an avid reader, maybe don't start with these. Maybe Backcountry Nordic is for you if you're a beginner skier. or beginner reader, like starting to read habitually again. But part one of the series, I picked books for myself that I knew I would be able to read even if I didn't like reading. That would kind of keep me going and hold me up. So that's what part one was about, and this is what my reading preferences kind of evolved into. And I think I learned a lot this summer. So I'm gonna see what else I get up to this fall. Might make another video on reading lists like that. But as far as the official summer reading list, uh, this is what will feed my content on my blog for the next few months. So that's been a lot of fun. And thanks for watching. And comment down below if you ever get around to reading any of these or have any recommendations for books that I should read. Definitely put those down in the comments, because I'm interested to see what other ski instructors are reading. Even if it's Harry Potter or something, even if it's not relevant to skiing, let me know what you're reading. I'm always interested in seeing where people's heads go with that. Thank you.